So some new Magistus support has been released, and it seems very, very useful for the White Forest deck. These cards, Spoon and Crowley, are coming out sometime next year for the TCG. They're in some weird promo sets in the OCG, so I don't know exactly when they're coming out. I haven't shown combos with the Chorozo card, which is also a Magistus card, because I believe that's also a promo. But these cards work extremely well with the White Forest engine. This is a light spellcaster that you can search off of Arciela, or it works basically the same way if you hard draw it. So I think that this card is good enough that you could play it at 3, but depending on what you want to fit into your list, you could also just play it at 1 because it is searchable. Okay, first of all, before we get into the new cards, why would you have even played Magistus monsters to begin with? Before, it didn't really make sense, and here's why. So, Zoroa is a level 8 Synchro monster that requires a Spellcaster Tuner and a 1+ non-tuner monsters. If this card is Synchro summoned, you can equip one Magistus monster from your extra deck to this card. Your opponent cannot activate the effects of monsters with the same card type, Fusion, Synchro, XYZ, or Link, as a Magistus monster card in your Spell and Trap Zone. So imagine you go into this, for example, like if you think of the White Forest Pure version as it is now, you could have like a Sylvie on field and like a tank or a soldier, okay, and you make the Zoroa. On summon, Zoroa equips a Magistus monster from the extra deck. So it could be a Link, it could be an XYZ, there are 2 XYZs, it could be a Fusion. There's also another Synchro that is useless, so I'm not showing it here. And your opponent is locked out of those monsters for the rest of the turn. Locked out of activating the effects of those monsters for the rest of the turn. So this is really like a going first only floodgate that didn't really threaten much. But that changes now because this card can be searched off of Arciela. So let's look at these new cards. Spoon says you can discard this card, then activate one of these effects. Either add a Magistus monster from your deck to your hand, except itself, or you can have the attack of a face-up monster your opponent controls. The second effect I think will come up very rarely, but it doesn't target, so that's good to know. The second effect is extremely important to the combo. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one face-up monster you control, equip it with a Magistus monster from your extra deck or graveyard. And those are once per turn effects. So, Crowley is kind of the reason that this card is worth playing. So this is kind of like the Magistus Poplar. If this face-up card is used as fusion material, its name can be treated as Alistair the Invoker, which means that you can summon invoked monsters. So, once per turn effects. If this card is added to your hand except by drawing it, such as being searched off of Spoon, you can special summon it. If this card is normal or special summoned, so this is a trigger effect and it triggers itself, you can fusion summon one Magistus or invoked fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as material. Okay, first of all, when you look at the Magistus fusion monsters, you basically have Aiwas. This card is interesting because you could try to break a board with it, or you could leave it as an interruption going first. This is basically a quick play change of heart, but the monster that you steal, even though you keep it permanently, you cannot activate its effects. So the card is decent. But I think Mechaba is probably going to be more generically useful, just because the card can negate any monster type as long as you have something in your hand. And as you'll often see in a lot of combos, you can choose to have Sacred Azamina in your hand after already using it once, so you have a spell negate. And you're also going to be able to search a monster from your deck to your hand, part of the end of the combo. So the last thing that I want to mention before going into the actual lines is I do feel like the deck needs either some Fiendsmith line or just something else besides the pure stuff with the Azamina LZ. You could go for a much more heavy Azamina build, I suppose, but it does feel very, very convenient to just turn 2 monsters into Closed Heaven. The last thing that I want to mention is that Necroquip Princess, if you do choose to play this, remember this has the effect where it says, if a monster is sent from the hand to the graveyard to activate a card or effect, so this one discards it to activate its own effect, the Spoon, you can draw 1 card. So, you also can equip one of those monsters to this card as an equip spell, but I don't know why you would do that. You'd probably get the draw almost every single time. Okay, let's go and look at some of the gameplay. So, I have 3 different replays here. The first is if you are searching for Spoon off of Arciela. So, I'm not going to be telling you this is the most optimal route. I just want to show you what the end boards can look like, and I probably will do some more in-depth stuff later on when we're a little bit closer to this format. Okay, so let's say that we are just searching for whatever. Remember that this card actually said that it can add an Azamina or Sinful Spoils card. You're probably used to searching a spell specifically but this can add Azamina LZ of the White Forest, so that's super, super, super useful. Okay, so now we summon LZ and we search whatever. Here I summon Sylvie. I'm really just going into like a standard ladder here. And here we dump the Azamina Unleashing. Maybe I should give you a quick comment on this here. So I've chosen to put this into the deck instead of Woes. So this card is always treated as a White Forest card, and the advantage that this has over Woes is that Woes can only be searched as a White Forest card, so things that search White Forest cards, like the Sylvie. But because this is not just a White Forest card, but also an Azamina card, it means that whatever search Azamina cards can also search this card, so it's just slightly more accessible. So this card says, you can target cards on the field up to the number of fusion and synchro monsters, but they have to be Fiend, Illusion, or Spellcaster that you either control or are in your grave. You return them to the hand. So you also cannot Ash this card, which I guess makes it technically in a somewhat niche way better than Woes, but that is somewhat substantial because if your opponent, you know, has top decked an Ash, or they drew 2 Ash, which is not super likely, or for some other reason they didn't need to Ash you before, they're going to Ash the Woes almost all of the time. So it's kind of like a small upgrade here. And then it has a standard White Forest Spell Trap effect, where if it's sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, you can reset it. So that's why I'm playing that. Here I can summon the Azamina LZ, and I am going to synchro summon here so that I can get a search off of it, but technically you can also fusion summon. Here I'm going to activate Deception, I'm going to special summon Rusia. The exact line here doesn't really matter, it's just that I search for the spoon off of the Arciela before going into Diabel. So this is really the focal point of the combo that I'm trying to show you right here. So here I'm going to activate the spoon by searching for the Crowley. The reason that I summoned the Rusia first is because I just wanted another material. This one actually does fusion summon with monsters from your hand or field, but I guess, you know, if you wanted like a Rusia draw, you'd obviously have to special the Rusia first, but it doesn't matter if it's on your hand or field, just in terms of being a material. So now we trigger itself and we can fuse into a Mechaba. So okay, here's what's important. 2 things. First of all, if you are going to bring out something like a Sylvie or a Rusia from the grave by shuffling back an Arciela, you are diminishing the number of materials that count for Azamina Unleashing. So you'll be able to bounce less cards. However, you should have at least one at all times because of the Diabel or something else in your grave, and unless you recycle the Murcielago, you will also have a second. So I think that in most games, you're probably going to have around 2 bounces off of Unleashing, or if you have a game state where you think this is super effective, you can make it so that you can keep a little bit more. Okay, another thing that I wanted to show here is that if you are playing the Goat and you draw Goat, cards like Cheng Ying are a lot more useful. This card is not that hard to trigger with a combination of Wanted and Goat. Wanted, obviously, you can't use on your opponent's turn because it's not a trap card, but having 6 cards in your deck, one of which is very easily searchable, to be able to trigger Cheng Ying makes it worth consideration. I'm not saying it's optimal, but it's something you can definitely play. Okay, now if we recycle the Murcielago to give us back the Sacred Azamina, we still have another material that we can send to bring out the Ilia Sylvia. And then here we can just get a draw. Now, here's what's super, super important, is that the spoon can banish itself to equip a Magistus monster from the grave or extra deck to any monster. I'm here going to equip it to the Mechaba because I feel like it's one of the monsters that's least likely to leave the field, that or the Cheng Ying, because this will tribute itself to negate, and this will often be like synchro material for itself, so it's not going to stay. And the thing about this that's useful is that the Moon Maiden can search another spoon. Actually, it adds any Magistus monster, but because of the ratios that we're playing, this is really just going to be spoon. Technically, you can search Crowley off of this, and that would be able to trigger Crowley's effect, but because it's once per turn, you probably won't be doing that very often. The reason that you do this is because this is the monster that you would discard off of Mechaba for the monster negate. You don't want to have to use your engine follow-up if you could use something else that's basically free. This is not a real game, I'm just playing against myself, but I just wanted to show you, you know, your opponent puts something in the grave, they have something on field, you have Goat, you know, you call whatever, and then the Cheng Ying can banish stuff. And if your opponent continues to play, remember that even if you're not using your negate or the Diabel or whatever, or you like got Dark Ruler, you still actually have the Unleashing, and here you have 2 bounces. So there's your first replay example. Here's another one. If you draw Spoon, it's not really like hugely different, but the main advantage is that you can kind of start with this. So let's say that you Spoon and you summon the Crowley, and you're thinking there's something that you're afraid of that you want to negate. Now this does not beat the Charmies or Shifter or Droll, which makes this not the solution to the problems that we have. Our life is still bad if our opponent has access to those types of non-engine. And we still have to play stuff like thrust and talents and whatever to try to turn skip our opponent if we're going to get turn skipped. However, this does beat stuff like Nib, which may or may not be popular at that point in the format. So here we're going to use a material from hand. In this case, it's a Sylvie, and we have the Mechaba online, and we have, whatever in hand to deal with this. Most likely, you're going to be negating either an Impulse or a Imperm, or you're going to be negating like a Veiler or a Nib or something, depending on how your opponent plays. Then we can equip the Moon Maiden here, and again use the effect to search another spoon, and that allows us to not have to keep our engine in our hand, but we can just have this as a free discard. So now if we use the LZ, this is like another kind of like soft synergy, is that we don't actually need the Maiden to stay on field. This is not doing anything after it searches. So we can send that as kind of like a free material to the grave to summon the LZ, and then we can continue our combo from there. Again, I'm searching the Unleashing, using it as cost, and searching the Azamina LZ. Remember, this is a White Forest card. So we can search that off the Arciela, and it's a free summon. And then I also just wanted to show you that you don't have to go into the standard Diabell lines, which are probably still better, but you can actually go for the Zoroa, and then you can, let's say you're playing against Ryzeal or whatever, and you've actually gotten this far, or they've stopped everything else, but you are able to summon this card. They now can't use XYZ monster effects, or they can't activate those effects. So there are also some other things that you could kind of do here where, you try to get the Ilia Sylvia on field, and maybe if you have two materials, you can turn those into whatever. So maybe this could be like a Silhouette Rabbit, it could be a Closed Heaven, whatever. So the point is that you have a Floodgate, you have an Omni Negate, and then you have an invoked Mechaba that requires you to have a card in hand. Now, I don't have a card in hand right now, but the point is just to show you what you can do based on how you want to play your resource game. The downside to going all out with this particular build is that you won't have stuff in hand, and that is not acceptable. So you do actually need to have follow-up. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to show you is if you are playing the Fiendsmith cards, that your board can look slightly different. And I feel like it's, the thing is that it's not really that much worse into the Charmies or Shifter or whatever, because you are losing to those cards anyhow, but it does substantially raise the ceiling of the deck, and so I feel like it's worth consideration. So here we search for the Spoon again off of the Arciela, and here I'm making the Diabell. We activate Wanted, we search the Witch. The Witch will give us another Wanted here, because we're not playing the Snake Eyes stuff. Here we tribute something to get the Sacred Azamina. That brings out the Murcielago, and that will search, for example, an Azamina LZ, because remember, it just is an Azamina card. It doesn't have to be a spell or trap. There is... yeah, there are other things you could do here, but if you wanted to go for the Closed Heaven line, you'd Closed Heaven, Requiem, bring out the Engraver, equip the Requiem to the Engraver, go for Necroquip. Now the Engraver can shuffle Closed Heaven to bring itself out. I think that this is probably going to be better in this version of the deck, because your extra deck space will be quite tight with the Magistus stuff, especially depending on how large the package is you want to play. So I don't think there's space for stuff like... if you want to play like the Desiree and the Sequence, like you could play those cards instead and have the same 4 cards in your extra deck, but then your main deck becomes, I think, substantially worse. So I feel like the main deck is less bad with just one Engraver, and so it's probably better to just stick to the Wave Hiking plays. So here you go for the Wave Hiking. You can add back the Hallowed Azamina, the Sacred Azamina. And remember that even though we are searching duplicates or we have access to multiple Wanteds, these are still acting as fodder for the Sacred Azamina. Anyhow, the Crowley summons itself out, and here we're going to fuse using the Azamina LZ, which was really just searched to have a material to fuse into, because we had already used that before, so it's not like that we're like wasting the resource. We just needed something to search, and it happened to be that. And so here we search for the Invoked Mechaba. We again use the Grave Effect of Spoon to equip the Magistus Maiden, and that searches us the last thing that the Mechaba can destroy. And so now we have the Sacred Azamina as a spell negate and the Spoon as a monster negate in our hand. Or you can use Sacred Azamina to summon the Ilia Sylvia. So this will lose harder to breakers, I guess, because you are getting rid of everything in your hand. But I'm just trying to show you that, you have like a lot of control over how far you want to go. Like if you really want to commit to like an actual combo board, or if you want to keep more follow-up. I feel like keeping more follow-up is probably better, but if you're not on the toy engine, you do have to be careful that your resource game is going to be a little bit more punishing if you make mistakes. So that is mostly what I wanted to show for today. I would like to cover the Snake Eyes version of the deck in Supreme Darkness that uses Azamina LZ, because remember, this card can add a Sinful Spoils card, and that includes the original Sinful Spoils Snake Eye. So I'll release that tomorrow. If you want, you can subscribe. If you don't, then don't. Thanks for watching.